Western District, Dina King, who's also here. We have a number of legislators. I've seen a number and probably missed some, but we've got Senators Marcus, Natasha Marcus, Michael Garrett, Natalie Murdoch. We've got Representative Ashley Clemens, Marcia Morey, Representative Becky Carney, Representative Rudaw, and Representative Logan. And if there are others, you can give your name around here. We'll make sure that you get recognized. We have a lot of law enforcement from across the state, a number of chiefs. I know we have Sheriff Blackwood and Sheriff Burkhead from Durham. There may be others, and we'll find that out as well. We have health professionals. We have advocates. We have staff from our governor's office, our policy staff. Natalia, Jess, and the team have done a magnificent job on this. Because of the increase in violence the past couple of years, local, state, and federal leaders and advocates have begun taking action across the state. Over the last year, I have convened groups of sheriffs and chiefs and mayors and public health leaders and emergency health care workers and responders to hear from them, hear about the challenges that they're facing, and to hear about what they're doing about it. I heard a lot, some of it disturbing, like the emergency room physician telling me, when you're having to put pressure on the bullet wound of a 4-year-old, it changes your life. When you hear those kinds of stories, you know that it is time to take action. We heard a lot about the significant increase in the number of guns in our community and our society as a whole, many more of them being purchased over the last couple of years. And we heard about a lot of community intervention efforts that are occurring, and a lot happening in our health system, a lot more. You've heard the statistics. I went over them in my State of the State address, but gunfire has surpassed car accident as the number one cause of injury deaths among children. Children in North Carolina are 51% more likely to die from gun violence than in the United States as a whole. Too many families and communities are enduring the tragic injuries and deaths from homicide, from carelessness, from suicide. And whether a gun is used or not, violence is a tragedy that has to be stopped. It requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. And that's what this is about today. At the state level, we are taking action. We are beginning our firearm safety campaign. I have asked my Department of Public Safety, our task force on racial equity in criminal justice, to focus on violence prevention efforts. We are working to draw down federal funds. A lot of positive steps are being taken across our state, but it is clear that we need more coordination. So today I'll be signing an executive order to create the Office of Violence Prevention in the Department of Public Safety of state government. It will be the first of its kind in the South. It will help us grow the infrastructure to tackle violence in a comprehensive and coordinated way. It'll help leaders across the state who wake up every day thinking about how to prevent violence in our communities be more effective. And it'll coordinate law enforcement and public health and advocates. It'll offer training and technical assistance. It will identify and inform about best practices and model programs. It'll partner with universities and research institutions for data and evidence-based solutions. It'll help us draw down federal funding and other types of grants. We need better laws to keep guns out of the hands of children, out of the hands of criminals, out of the hands of those who are a danger to themselves or others. And there have been some good legislation presented. Unfortunately, the General Assembly has not yet wanted to take these steps. So we must tackle these challenges with the tools that we have. And that's one of the things that we are doing today. The good thing is that people in this room and all across the state are working on this. And I know that this office will be a catalyst for safer communities for years to come. One of the first things that we talked about the fact is that you think about violence as a crime issue, but it's also very much a health issue, a public health issue. And that's why I'm going to recognize our Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Cody Kinsley. Secretary Kinsley.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you, even for such a somber and sobering and often tragic topic. It's also an urgent story, one that demands action. On average, 5 North Carolinians die per day from a firearm injury. And the firearm death rate for North Carolina's children has increased dramatically from 2020 to 2021. And perhaps most tragically, firearm-related suicides among North Carolina's children have also increased, with the 2021 suicide rate the highest it has been in 2 decades. To underscore the governor's point, this is a public health issue, one that I know many of you in this room work on every single day, trying to go to the drivers of health, support communities with access to healthy food and resources and supports that make a difference in not only individuals' lives, but their communities' lives as a whole. That ask the question when individuals end up in an emergency department with a gunshot wound, how did we get here? And what are the choices that led us to this moment? And how do we start to unwind this story for so many that seems to be going at a hyperspeed for a lot more folks? I am so excited about this new office, and I cannot say enough about Secretary Buffalo and his leadership and his partnership and his entire team in trying to use every tool possible to make a difference in North Carolina's communities. This is an important one, but I want to also emphasize the amazing work that is happening all across the state already in many of our emergency departments, led by trauma physicians, our local health departments, which we'll hear from in just a moment, who are building out teams that go into the ground that leverage trusted connections to try to get folks diverted and truly prevent violence before it happens. These are public health issues, and guess what, folks? This is what works. We know that when we follow the data and we understand these problems, we match it with these solutions that work, that over time, just like with car injuries and other preventable deaths, we can turn the dial on these issues. We look forward to using every possible tool that we can, because going back to where I started, we cannot let another child die because they accidentally stumble upon a gun in the back seat of their father's truck and lose their lives. We cannot let another person die because in their deep moment of hopelessness, they feel like the only option they have is to end their life. We can do these things and save these lives, and we do it by working together. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back to Secretary Buffalo.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Governor and A.G. Stein. Like the governor has said, the time is now. The time is now to reach out for our future and to protect our future. DPS has a long-standing commitment in preventing violence. We believe that this office will increase the department's capability to aid and support our local partners in violence prevention, ensure better coordination among various state agencies who are doing great work. Let me tell you just a few things that DPS is doing. Our Juvenile Justice Delinquent Prevention Division is leading development of comprehensive statewide initiative to educate the public about the importance of responsible firearms storage that we plan to roll out in late spring. This public awareness campaign will include a website, a broadcast, streaming, and print advertisements, social media presence, and a toolkit for local communities can participate in, and we hope to have this in the month of June. Our Governor's Crime Commission prioritizes the fundings of evidence-based interventions to reduce community-based violence. For example, the first time in the Crime Commission's history, restorative justice was included in our vocal priority along with hospital-based violence intervention programs. Also, the Commission supports our domestic violence shelters and child advocacy centers to ensure that victims don't continue to be victims and to stop the cycle of violence in North Carolina. With our federal funding and our Victims of Crimes and our Victims Against Women Act and our Children's Act and our Burn JAG risk assessments where we divert youth. But let me say that law enforcement, you're not by yourselves. It's the whole of community. And that's why we're here today, to protect our whole of community. But most important, I'm proud to serve with Justice Anita Earls as a co-chair of the Governor's Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, now housed in the Department of Public Safety. One of TREC's 4 priorities is violence prevention, including evidence-based community violence intervention programs, restorative justice, youth crime reduction efforts, and school justice partnerships. As a career law enforcement officer, like many of my colleagues here today, we have all had the personal experience of violence within our communities. The partnership now that we have with our community-based public-private partnerships and the leadership with Secretary Kinsley and his team, undoubtedly, we want to protect our future, and we want to protect the state as a whole. That experience makes me enthusiastic about this opportunity to partner. So thank you, Governor, for your leadership, and thank you all for being advocates for a coordinated statewide effort to prevent violence in our state. Let me introduce Attorney General Stein.
Thank you, Secretary Buffalo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Governor Cooper, for having us here today and for taking action that will make sure that we can all live in safe communities. Secretary Kinsley, good to be with you as well, my friend. The rise in violence, particularly gun violence across our state, is greatly troubling. In Charlotte, about 2 years ago, a beautiful, then 7-year-old girl named Ziana Grace was hit by a stray bullet. That accidental bullet hit her lung, her liver, and her ribs. Thank God that that bullet did not take her life. But as she was recovering, she said, "I wish people would stop shooting guns because it really hurts." Ziana is so young to know that firsthand, but she is right. Guns do real damage, not just to the people who were shot, but to the families and the communities that are traumatized, who fear that their loved ones and their neighbors are next. And it does not have to be this way. We can do 2 things at the same time. We can respect people's Second Amendment rights, and we can take common sense measures to drive down the number of gun deaths in this state. We can do this by putting in place universal background checks to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, including violent felons. Instituting red flag laws so family members can petition a court to temporarily remove a gun from a loved one's possession so they do not do harm to themselves or others. We can raise the minimum age to 21 to buy an AR-15 or other semi-automatic rifle. A 20-year-old can't buy a cigarette or a beer. They should not be able to buy a semi-automatic rifle. Promoting safe storage and responsible gun ownership to keep guns out of the wrong people's hands, particularly our children. And Secretary Buffalo talked about the campaign that the administration is going to roll out this spring to promote just that. Help people heal both physically and emotionally after violence so we can break that cycle of violence. Intervening early when young people are at risk of violence, particularly with summer and after-school programs, and keeping kids in school whenever we possibly can so that they can have something constructive and productive to do with their time and they don't fall into bad acts. We have our work cut out for us to address the problem of gun violence, but we must do everything we can to keep our neighbors, our family members, our fellow citizens, but especially our kids safe. And I'm grateful to Governor Cooper for not only caring deeply about this issue, but having the will to take action. Secretary Buffalo talked about the Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. Governor Cooper created this over 2.5 years ago. And that task force, which I was honored to co-lead for a time, made a recommendation to have these violence prevention programs furthered in this state so we can support local efforts to break the cycle of violence. And it is gratifying to see the governor act on that. So thank you, Governor Cooper. I look forward to the great progress that the Office of Violence Prevention will make on this issue in the coming months and years. And I'm committed to doing everything in my power as Attorney General, alongside my colleagues at the Department of Public Safety and Department of Health and Human Services, to build communities that are free from violence. We owe Ziana and every other child our best efforts to keep them safe. So I thank you for being here this morning, and I now have the honor of introducing Dr. Raymond Washington, who is the Mecklenburg County Public Health Department Director. He is no stranger to violence intervention programs. He was the chief epidemiologist in the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, where he led the city's violence prevention efforts. Dr. Washington.
Thank you, Attorney General Stein, and thank you, Governor Cooper, for having me here today, Secretary Kinsley. Certainly a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. As has already been said, I have the great pleasure of leading the Health Department in Mecklenburg County and serving that community. And in Mecklenburg, we have been working over the last few years under the leadership of my colleague Tracy Campbell, who is here with me today, in our Office of Violence Prevention to address violence as a public health issue in our community. I'm so excited about today because this represents the infrastructure, similar infrastructure being built here at the state level that will be able to support us at the local level as we work every day on the ground in communities to address this critical issue. As everybody here knows, violence is not a new issue. Violence has been a problem in communities across this country for such a long time. The reality of it is how we address or how we tackle violence is such a critical and changing dynamic. It is not simply a law enforcement issue. It is an issue of all the key partners who work in communities every day to create opportunity and hope. That includes public health. It includes the healthcare systems. It includes our education systems. Really importantly, it includes our employers. It includes law enforcement as well, of course. It includes our businesses. It includes our banks. It includes every neighbor and every community and that we serve. And so I'm so excited about this office and the work that's to come because really it's important to coordinate across government partners. We often operate in silos as government entities, but the benefit of having a coordinated entity to be able to play quarterback in the work that we do to address violence is so important. Whether you are affected, we're all affected by violence, but the reality is that some communities are disproportionately traumatized every single day by shootings, by the threat of violence, and that trauma is something that we as communities and government officials have got to work alongside community members to address, and as the Attorney General just said, and bring healing and hope to those communities. So I'm grateful to be here today and fortunate for the opportunity to speak, and of course excited about this new Office of Violence Prevention here at the state level. So thank you all. One more job. It's certainly my pleasure to introduce Ms. Ingram Bell, who will be speaking. She is working on the ground in Greensboro in a program called Cure Violence that's working every day to interrupt violence in communities. So Ms. Bell.
Good morning. My name is Ingram Hazlip, formerly Ingram Bell. I stand here before you today as a survivor and as an advocate. I am currently the program manager for One Step Further's Gate City Coalition Community Violence Prevention Program located in Greensboro, North Carolina, as well as a board member of North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. In 2011, I was shot in my head while riding in a car by an assailant who was attempting to retaliate against someone I was involved with. I later had brain surgery while awake and pregnant due to the injury. I not only had one brush with death, but two because of a gun. I was one of the lucky ones who survived such a hideous act of violence. Many of my community members do not live to stand before you and say they were a miracle. I lost my cousin in 2017 to gun violence, and most recently, I lost my business partner, my sister, my friend, my kid's godmom to this horrible epidemic. I stand before you today because they do not get to use their voice, because they are voiceless. Since 2014, I vowed to help those in my community who have been plagued with this disease. Gun violence in our community is an epidemic that has haunted us for years. Community violence programs helps us to get to the root of the problem. It uses those of us who have the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of our community to better our community. It allows us to cure violence at the core of the issue. While serving the role of program manager at GCC, we have had 365 days without a homicide in our target areas. We have had a 30% decrease in aggravated assaults as well since 2019. Our team has mediated over 600 incidents and 1,200 meetings with violent offenders to reduce violence within our city in the last year. CVI programming allows community members from the community to save our community by approaching the disease holistically. We get involved with our community by using open community dialogue and the hands-on approach. My drive is to always better the marginalized community in which I'm from. With the state that our nation is currently in, and gun violence is at an all-time high, affecting our friends, family, and loved ones, it is important to have these types of offices and programs in place. It takes pioneers to fight for our community, sit with the common folk, and find solutions to better our nation. Violence affects us all and is going to take everyone. There will be not one simple solution to this problem, but a collaborative effort from lawmakers and the community. No more telling our community what it needs, but listening to the community's voices as they express their needs and concerns. Violence prevention programs include community members who understand our community, look like our community, talk like our community, empathize with our community, and love our community one block at a time. It's programs like ours that save community members such as myself. I'm a survivor of violence, and these are the programs we need. I'm not someone who came in and told us what we needed, but I'm a community member who knows and understands what we need. It is my charge to you today to consider bringing a community violence prevention program to your city. Please consider becoming a change agent in your community. It's going to take us all to fulfill this mission. Thank you, guys. Now I'll turn it over to Secretary Buffalo.
Thank you, Ms. Ingram. Now, this time, I'll turn it back over to Governor Cooper for signing of the executive order and invite those invited guests to stand behind the governor here at the desk.
I'm going to ask Bill Toole, the Secretary of State, to come and attest. Executive order is no good without the Secretary of State attesting.
And I have to prove that this is really the governor.
I'll show you my license. We now have an Office of Violence Prevention. from the media. And anybody up here will, I'm sure. This office is going to coordinate efforts on violence prevention, will provide training, tactical assistance, will help apply for grants, will help coordinate efforts that are going on with other communities that are working to provide examples for programs that work for local communities. We need a clearinghouse. A lot of great things are happening across the state. We need to make it more cohesive and coordinated. And this is something that has been a request from everyone who's been working on this, that this is an important thing to do.
Does this need any funding from the legislature or,
So,
initiating legislation?
no, we're using existing state and federal funds that we've been able to draw down. I think with the success of this office, we may see that if it can do more, that we would want to make it a permanent part of state law. But right now, it will exist in the Department of Public Safety, and we'll get an executive director hired very soon. Secretary Buffalo will begin that process and hopefully hit the ground running.
How many people will work in the office with this existing DPS staff that will be moved over to it? And is there like a 6-month, 12-month time where you look at, how is the coordination gone?
So the first thing we will do is hire an executive director, and there will be tremendous support already from the Department of Public Safety and Department of Health and Human Services, which is going to work in a coordinated way to help this executive director to do the things that he or she would need to do. I think we'll go from there once we hire the executive director.
The legislature is looking to pass several gun bills that I think you vetoed in the past. Do you intend to veto it again? And do you see any room for compromise on gun violence issues in terms of legislation this session?
I would like us to move forward to fight gun violence with legislation instead of backward. Attorney General Stein outlined a number of provisions that I would favor that we could take to reduce the number of guns that could get into the hands of children, of people who are a danger to themselves or others, of criminals who endanger people in the community, who endanger law enforcement officers. Legislation that I have seen right now goes the opposite way. And so we'll continue to fight that kind of legislation, but also continue to encourage the General Assembly to take some positive steps. There were some positive steps done in last session that were recommended by the Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, and we were able to get some bipartisan support in those efforts. So we're going to continue to try, particularly with this overwhelming evidence that we see coming in with the number of gun deaths that are occurring. You can support the Second Amendment and people's rights to bear arms and still take steps to reduce gun violence. They go hand in hand, and I'll tell you, the vast majority of responsible gun owners in this state want to do that. There are only a very few powerful people who are trying to hold off these laws that we think will help. But there are things we can do without that legislation, and we're taking one of those steps today.
One more.
Yeah.
On the timing of this, with the law enforcement that are finding out about this in the counties, how soon is there going to be someone they can talk to if they need help in their community?
How soon, Secretary Buffalo?
Right now.
Well, Secretary Buffalo is going to move very quickly to get someone in place. A lot of this work is already being done, but we need this office to be a clearinghouse and a place that is going to coordinate all of these efforts that are out there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.